It is so nice to be here, and it's funny to be here because in July of 1974, the League had its first meeting in this very room, and about 50 people came. And I guess he asked me to give some idea of how it got started, and what I'm going to do is just give a little overview of what those early days were like, and then let you all ask me questions. I think that'd be easier because some I don't want to bore you to death anyway, you know. First, I'd say something about what Oak Cliff was like in those days. Actually, I was born and raised in Oak Cliff, and I went to Adamson High School. And so I've lived in Oak Cliff except for being away in college and some other things. So I was familiar with the old neighborhoods and have always loved them. But when my husband and I bought in Winnetka Heights in 1973, none of the neighborhoods in Oak Cliff had their identity anymore. Winnetka Heights wasn't even a term that was used. People just, either they had forgotten them or they never knew, but no one referred to the neighborhoods that way. And we were enamored of our house and still are. And we loved the feel of all the neighborhoods that we were seeing, but we saw that there was nothing going on, and we were aware that Swiss Avenue, of course, the Swiss Avenue district was had got started a year or two before, and we heard there was going to be a survey done of all the historic sites, neighborhoods, etc. in the city, and so we decided to see if we could find out something about that and maybe submit our neighborhood. I did some research downtown in the library, finding out what the name of the neighborhood was and some things about it. And I began to go up and down the streets and knock on doors. And I met people that way. And we got together a group of about 25. It wasn't 25 households, many of them were couples. And we submitted a letter to the planning department in June, and we, to Alan Mason. None of you people probably remember Alan Mason, but anyway, you do, Barbara, probably. And Barbara and I put on our white gloves and hats with veils and anyway, he recommended that we talk to the Historic Preservation League, which is now Preservation Dallas, but that's what it was called in those days, and start getting a neighborhood organization together. And so we did that, and we had our first meeting here. And the plan department came out, and Preservation League was here advising us, and that's how it all got started. And we got a board together, and we began to set goals, and we got ourselves chartered by the December. But some of the things that were going on here at the time were the zoning in all these neighborhoods had been a blanket zoning put on in 1965, which was done just by the city. There was no individual owner notification. It was just ads in the paper that said this was going to happen. And it was mostly townhouse and multifamily, all with the idea that it would develop, because our city did not have any sensitivity toward our old neighborhoods at that time. And we might question about it today a little bit. But it's better certainly now than it was then. And they just looked on these areas as being ripe for redevelopment. And I think many of the property owners probably thought, well, you know, we want these old houses, and maybe we'll sell and get some money for, you know, our properties. But what it really did is that it didn't produce very much. We do have a few apartment houses, like next door, that came out of that, where a beautiful house was torn down. But mostly, not a lot sold, and there was a lot of redlining by banks and so forth. Then another thing the city did to us was they had a thoroughfare plan, and they were going to make one-way couplets all through our neighborhoods. And those were imminent at that time, especially 7th Street. And in fact, one of the couplets would have gone right through Ruth Chenoweth's house with 9th and 10th. So there was a lot for us to consider and begin working on, and that's what we did. and we got the attention of the plan department. We got the thoroughfare plan put on hold, or at least what they wanted to do. We started a plan development for Winnetka Heights because they didn't think at that time that we were ready to be a district. I think there was a little bit of a mindset at that time that a district had to look like Swiss Avenue. And since then, of course, they realized that there are all sorts of wonderful neighborhoods in the city that are worthy of preservation. And we didn't call ourselves the Winnetka Heights Neighborhood Association, even though that's where it started, because we had such an incredible vision that we thought that we knew there were other neighborhoods out there, and we knew we were just part of all of Old Oak Cliff, and so that's why we called ourselves that. And we began right away. Besides working in Winnetka Heights, we got involved with the Jefferson Area Association. We started documenting other neighborhoods, doing a lot of research. We became involved with the Historic Preservation League. We became involved with a Neighborhood Conservation Alliance that was made up of neighborhood organizations all over the city that were trying to help pick council members. This wasn't a single member districts at that time, you know, and so there was a slate of council members generally picked, and we were trying to have a little influence on that, but we couldn't do it through the league, so we did it through another group. We became involved in the Dallas Heritage Society, which was also a group, an umbrella group, and we began to reach out into our other neighborhoods here and try to get them involved. And Winnetka Heights did most of its own work with its historic designation in '81. So certainly the league was a big support to us on that, and then they branched out and had their own group, and the rest is history. All of you all are well aware of all the wonderful things the league has done, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. I might suggest to you, if you haven't thought of it, that there weren't any cell phones in those days. There was no email, no computers. A manual typewriter was what everything was typed on. Sometimes with carbon copies, or if we were really modern, we went out and had them copied at the copier. And so you can imagine that it did take a lot of time, and there were a lot of wonderful people involved doing that research, beating the streets, because we couldn't have gotten a PD in Winnetka Heights without having over 50% of the neighborhood to sign petitions. And we had to have petitions for the thoroughfare, and that meant door to door explaining the zoning to people, because most people were abysmally ignorant of zoning, as why would yeah. And so it was a big job, but you know, Ruth was a huge part of it, and I know a lot of you remember her, but there are not very many people left in our neighborhood over here that were part of that first board. But a lot of great people have died or they've moved away, but I'm in looking over this and cleaning out an old window seat today to find these things. It made me feel very good, and I have a lot of great memories about some of those people and what good friends they were. Because there's nothing like bringing a neighborhood together, nothing like a good zoning case to bring them. So, with that, I'll open it up, and I'm sure I've left out something that people would like to know maybe, and I'll be glad to answer some questions.
What were the home tours like?
Oh, I was going to say something about that. I'm glad you reminded me. The home tours were more, they started out in 1975, and they were called the Urban Pioneer House Tours. And they were our neighborhood, Oak Lawn, and East Dallas. And Swiss Avenue had its own home tour always. And so this was like Munger Place in that area. And you had about 12 homes or buildings. Some of the ones were buildings in Oak Lawn. And each neighborhood had about 4. And that's how it went for quite a few years. I think until the 80s, we kept the name the Urban Pioneer Tour. I was trying to figure that out today, but certainly all the way through the 70s, and it was a joint thing. And that was another way we worked with other preservation groups, because they were great, and like if we had to go to the council for something, they came down and supported us. They wrote letters. It was all over the city. There was a great sympathy with the groups with each other. And, you know, the home tours were more of a, well, they were all, of course, in the older neighborhoods, and they were, a lot of it was to do with showing people who might be wanting to buy what it was like to buy an old house. Maybe some of them would be in process. A lot of them would be in process, where you could see this part of the house is done, but this isn't. And we don't have a lot of that, I don't think, anymore. Most of our houses are complete. But in those days, a lot of those people were doing their own work. And it was, they really were urban urban pioneers that did it more than maybe now. But you're still an urban pioneer when you move into the inner city. It's just a little different type of situation. Mm-hmm.
Mary, one of the things that's happened in the last few years at the League is that we almost deliberately and been trying to spread out beyond just our little part of North Oak Cliff. Now, you've named the League the Old Oak Cliff Conservation League.
Mm-hmm.
What's your definition of Old Oak Cliff?
Well, at that time, it would have been, I can't think of boundaries exactly, certainly all the way over to Methodist Hospital. I mean, it would have included Kessler and Stevens, except that they weren't early members of the League. But, I mean, that is older areas of Oak Cliff, particularly the Stevens Park. I think anything that was, you know, any of the early 1900s, the neighborhoods were platted. But we didn't envision necessarily going out as far, even to Wynwood. I don't know that we had thought of that at the time. But as the League developed, it became more of an umbrella for neighborhood groups as well. But no matter how old they were, and after all, Wynwood is 50 years old now, 50 plus. So at that time, though, you have to remember how long ago this was. I was very young. And certainly there were neighborhoods even east of Beckley, but we were never able to do very much over there.
We've got a couple.
But I know that didn't answer your question very well, but if you just think of where we've got our oldest housing stock, that was what we were thinking of. But that's a pretty large area. Mm-hmm. What would have been the original Oak Cliff before you had your development out, you know, Glen Oaks, those places, because those didn't develop in the 60s, as I recall. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad Phil asked that question because I grew up in Oak Cliff, and we have recently welcomed the Glen Oaks to the League.
That's what I heard.
Last fall, and I was just wondering what your opinion was because, like I said, Glen Oaks is now approaching 50 years old, mm-hmm. and has a wonderful housing stock there that a lot of people don't know of. So, but what do you think? Are you aware of this kind of a reaction that I'm seeing in the media or social media about people that are looking at people who use the term North Oak Cliff as some sort of an elitist? And it makes me laugh because, like I said, I grew up here, and to me, when I go through all these neighborhoods, they don't look that much different than they did when I was a kid. They honestly don't. They have the same character. And I was just wondering if you were aware of this, the term North Oak Cliff getting there's almost a backlash against it.
Well, I didn't realize that it had gotten that way, but I can see where that might happen. I think that, you know, when we were in the early days of Winnetka Heights, when I was in the Rosemont preschool, that was before we even used our term Winnetka Heights, the preschool wouldn't have a meeting south of Davis. They met in people's homes and had lunch in people. That's not the PTA now, that's different. PTA met at the school. The preschool was kind of the junior league of Oak Cliff. And they didn't, you know, all of the stuff